Once upon a time, you gotta love sermons that start that way, don't you? This is a true story, though. It's not a fairy tale. Once upon a time, in 1 Samuel chapter 15 to be exact, King Saul was given instructions by God through the prophet Samuel. And those instructions seemed so simple. I want you to go and totally, completely wipe out the Amalekites. Just wipe them off the face of the earth. That's what the instructions were. And do you know that King Saul followed those instructions mostly? He destroyed a lot of what the Amalekites had, but there were some of the better animals, some of the higher ranking officials, such as the king of the Amalekites, that Saul was unwilling to destroy. This presumptuous attitude, which caused Saul to set aside some of what God said, is described in no uncertain terms by God as rebellion. Saul was practicing what we might call today cafeteria-style religion. What is a cafeteria? Well, it's a type of restaurant. It's different from other restaurants, though, because in some restaurants that you go to, when you order a meal, you're sitting at the table, you tell the waiter or waitress what you want, they bring you the plate, and everything is fine. In a cafeteria, you go through the line and you pick out only what you want. You want an entree, you want a dessert, you don't want vegetables, you don't get vegetables. It's that simple, right? Yeah, nobody likes vegetables, right? Yeah, no. But that's what a cafeteria is. And there's nothing wrong with that type of a restaurant, but when we apply that philosophy to our faith, well, something does become wrong. We might also call this kind of obedience selective service to God, in which we obey one part but not another part of what God has told us to do. We go with whatever happens to please us at the moment. But we are not at authority or in authority or able to just pick and choose the things that we want to or don't want to obey. This is a concept that I believe is clearly taught in James chapter 2, verses 10 and 11. For whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles at just one point is guilty of breaking all of it. For he who said, "Do not commit adultery," also said, "Do not murder." If you do not commit adultery but do commit murder, you have become a lawbreaker. Now, as we think about this, and as we think about what James writes here, I think we need to figure out what the point of James 2:10 is. And as we look at what the point of what James 2:10 is, the first place to start is that it does not teach. Okay, something it does not teach. Something that this passage does not teach is that no matter how devoted one is to the Lord, no matter how hard one tries to obey the Lord, that one inadvertent slip-up makes us as unrighteous in God's eyes as the worst sinner. It's not what this passage is about. It's not about people who are trying their best to do what God would have them to do, but every so often they mess up and they slip and they stumble, they fall, they get up, they dust themselves off, and they keep moving forward. That's not what this passage is talking about. Okay? A clear distinction is made in the New Testament for those who are honestly trying to serve God and those who are not. This distinction is seen in passages such as Romans 6, verses 16 through 18, where Paul says this, "Don't you know that when you offer yourselves to someone to obey him as slaves, you are slaves to the one whom you obey, whether you are slaves to sin, which leads to death, or to obedience, which leads to righteousness. But thanks be to God, though you used to be slaves to sin, you wholeheartedly obeyed that form of teaching to which you were entrusted. You have been set free from sin and have become slaves to righteousness. Another example of this can be seen in the church at Sardis. No member of the church of Sardis was perfect. But in Revelation chapter 3, a distinction is made between those who were trying and those who were not trying. In Revelation 3 verse 4 it says, "Yet you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their clothes. They will walk with me dressed in white, for they are worthy." So this passage does not teach us that if somebody is making an honest effort, but they slip and they stumble and they trip one time or two times or three times or a set number of times, that they're just no point in even trying anymore. That's not what the passage is telling us. The passage does teach, though, that God gave us all of His will, and that we do not have the prerogative of disregarding any of it, just arbitrarily. In other words, we cannot pick and choose what we want to obey or what we do not want to obey when it comes to the Word of God. The Word of God is not a cafeteria line. It's a plate lunch that has no substitutions, additions, or deletions allowed. You take it as it is or you don't take it at all. The problem is that of trying to be above the law, being a judge of the law rather than one who is to be judged by it. James 2:12. James says, "Speak and act as those who are going to be judged by the law that gives freedom." And then you move over to chapter 4, verse 11. "Brothers, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against his brother or judges him speaks against the law and judges it. When you judge the law, you are not keeping it, but sitting in judgment on it. There's only one lawgiver and one judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But you, who are you to judge your neighbor?" Perhaps we think that obedience in most things will compensate for disregard in a few. But you see, the problem with that type of thinking is that no amount of good works will compensate for a lawless attitude. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 through 23, Jesus says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons and perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.'" There are going to be some people on the day of judgment who are genuinely surprised. They are genuinely surprised because they thought they were doing God's work. They thought that they were serving God. But the problem was they had picked and chosen the part of the Word of God that they were going to allow to impact their own lives. And we can't do that. Like I said, it's an all or nothing sort of deal. You either take it or you don't take it. What happens sometimes is we pass the instructions of God through a filter. And if something doesn't make it through the filter, we just ignore it or we throw it away. Now, what do you mean, Carl? What do you mean filter? Well, some of the filters that we might use are our own preferences. If we prefer something, then we filter what God's Word says through that, and if it makes it through, that's great. But if it doesn't, then we say, well, it was a cultural thing, and we dismiss it. Another filter, convenience. Perhaps we filter God's commands through our own understanding, what we were taught when we were yay high, and hey, if we were taught it when we were this big, then obviously nothing can change. No one's understanding can change. No one can grow in their understanding. And so we think, well, if I was taught it when I was a little kid, it must be true because, well, for whatever reason. And in reality, that's a filter. Rather than learning and being molded by what the Word teaches, we try to mold and shape the Word into what we already believe. Consider Noah, for example. Genesis 6:13 through 22. Noah, of course, was commanded to build an ark. But not just any ark. Okay, God had specific instructions for Noah as to what the ark was, how big it was to be and everything. It was to be built of cypress or gopher wood, with 3 decks having rooms on each deck, coated with pitch inside and out. 300 by 50 by 30 cubits big, that's 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high, with 1 window and 1 door. Those were the instructions that God gave to Noah. Now, Genesis 6:22 is key. Genesis 6:22 tells us Noah did everything just as God commanded him. But just suppose Noah had filtered some of God's commands. What if Noah had said, I kind of like the smell of pine. And if I'm going to be cooped up in that ark for who knows how long, with all of those animals, the pine might give it a better aroma. Besides that, pine is on sale down at the lumber yard. Gopher wood, that's going to cost twice as much as pine, so I think I'll build it out of pine. What if Noah had said, all right, I'll use gopher wood, but, me and the missus, we need a room added on to the back there, just the private quarters sort of thing, so we can have some peace and quiet during our time aboard the ark. And so I'm going to add, a room on the back. It's not going to be too extravagant, but I'm just going to add a little bit. What if Noah had kept 80% or 90% of God's commandments? What about that other 10 to 20%? Would the 80 or 90% have compensated for his disregard in the remaining 10 to 20%? Thing is, we can only wonder what if. And we can only wonder what if is because Genesis 6:22 says Noah did everything just as God commanded him. He didn't see it as his prerogative. He didn't see it as his duty, his obligation to change what God had told him to do. We cannot build up extra credit with God by obeying some of what He commands right now so that we can disregard this when we wish to, or when we find something that we don't want to do, we don't have to do it. I remember when I was working in the Human Resources Department of the Alamo Community College District in San Antonio. I was really kind of bummed because I'd been preaching for 5 years and then now I wasn't preaching, still looking for a preaching job. But I got this job and I tell everybody human resources is a lot like preaching. You sit and you listen to people's problems and you tell them there's nothing I can do. Right? Okay, anyway. Well, they gave me an hour for lunch. Well, I wasn't going to be there very long. I was sort of a temporary employee anyway, and so I figured out I could eat lunch in about 15 minutes. So I would, at noon or shortly sometime around there, I would sign out or clock out, whatever, and then I'd go eat lunch, and then I'd come back in 15 minutes and sign back in. Well, the gentleman that was my supervisor called me in and said, you don't need to do that. You need to take your time for lunch. I said, well, but why? I mean, I'm eating, and then I come back and I work. And he said, well, okay. And so we worked this out to where it was what he termed comp time. So that extra 45 minutes during lunch that I was working was actually added on to Friday's time card. So between 1 and 2 o'clock on Fridays, I had worked my 40 hours for the week, and I was told, bye. I get an overtime here. Get out. And so it worked out nicely. I was able to build up that credit, if you will. Well, here's the thing. It doesn't work that way with God. You can work hard for God for a time, and as you work hard, that's great, but that doesn't allow you to disregard what God has said later on in life. If we set aside God's will when it conflicts with our own, then we are not obeying God even when we do what He tells us to do. Do you know why? Because if we only obey God when His will coincides with our will, and we disregard what God's will is when it goes against what our will is, we're not obeying God, we're obeying our own will. We're following our own desires. We're doing what we want to do, not what God wants us to do. And then every so often it just so happens that what God wants us to do is the same thing that we want to do. In truth, to disregard any part of God's will as we see it, in truth, to disregard any part of God's will as if we were not obligated to keep that part, is to become a lawbreaker, James 2:11 tells us. A transgressor of the law, one who flouts the law, an outlaw, as it were. So the point of James 2 verse 10 is not that no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, if you mess up, then you're history. And the point of James 2:10 is that we don't have the right to pick and choose. In other words, it has to do with the principle of unqualified obedience. We do what He tells us to do. Period. No discussion. What we are asked to have is an attitude of unqualified, unreserved, no strings attached submission to God's will for us. Matthew 22:37 is a good passage to look at that teaches this. Now, let me share with you a couple examples of this. First, a negative example. Amaziah was a king of Judah. In 2 Chronicles 25 verse 2, we are told this. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, but not wholeheartedly. That word whole here, as in not wholeheartedly, that word whole means finished, perfect, or, well, whole. If you look at the King James Version, it tells us this, not with a perfect heart. You look at the Revised Standard Version, it says, not with a blameless heart. The New King James has, not with a loyal heart. Moffat in his translation says, not with an undivided mind. So Amaziah did what was right, but he didn't do it wholeheartedly. He didn't go into it with everything that he had. And that wasn't pleasing to God. But it is possible to have wholehearted devotion to God. In contrast to Amaziah, consider a couple of positive examples. And I have two up there. Actually, it's three, but two of them sort of go together. The first is Joshua and Caleb. In Numbers 32, verses 11 and 12, God tells Moses, because they have not followed me wholeheartedly, not one of the men 20 years old or more who came up out of Egypt when I will see the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not one except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua son of Nun, for they followed the Lord wholeheartedly. God has always and will always require us, if we are to be found faithful, to follow His instructions wholeheartedly. Another good example is Josiah. Josiah was also a king of Judah. In 2 Kings 23 verse 25, though, we read this: "Neither before nor after Josiah was there a king like him, who turned to the Lord as he did, with all his heart, and with all his soul, and with all his strength, in accordance with all the law of Moses." Josiah turned to the Lord with all of his heart, with all of his soul, with all of his strength. Does that sound at all familiar to anybody? Doesn't that sound a little bit like Mark chapter 12, verse 30? When Jesus is asked what the greatest commandment is, and he says, "Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind." God places a high priority on unqualified obedience to Him. This is part of what it means to be pure in heart. Matthew 5:8. To be single-minded in our devotion to God and in our determination to do His will. To love one thing and one thing only, and that is following His will and doing what He wants us to do. Joshua and Caleb and Josiah, though, they lived a long time ago. What sort of application is there for us today? What sort of practical application can we make? How is this going to impact my life? Well, let me give you 4 questions to ask concerning it impacting your life. Number 1, do we refuse to participate in some of the things God has commanded to be done in our public worship assemblies? For example, Colossians 3:16 says, "Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, and as you sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God." Yes, some of us have a very unique singing style. And it's something that those who are leading the songs, they notice. That unique singing style that some people have is something like this. You sit there, you got a scowl on your face. If you broke a smile, that'd be disrespectful. So you don't smile. Sure, don't open your mouth. But what again? Colossians 3:16, "Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, and as you sing." Doesn't say as you sing well, or you sing perfectly, or you sing like a professional singer. It says as you sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God. You know, if you read a little further in Colossians 3, verse 23, it says, "And so whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart, as working for the Lord and not for men." Actually, that's verse 17. Verse 23 says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord and not for men." Whatever you do. We can get so used to just getting by and not giving our best. If we do it once or twice, just barely put forth enough effort to get by, and we get away with it, a lot of times that gives us the idea that, if we just don't put our whole heart into it, we'll get by. And so we start applying that. We have several in our congregation who play athletics. Let me ask you a question. If you went to a practice or a game and were not giving 100+% effort, would your coach tell you, well, that's okay, don't worry about it? Anyone here have a coach that would tell them that? I mean, seriously, if you do, I want to play on their team. Because I remember coaches from my high school career that they sort of frowned on people not putting 110% in to their practice or to the game. And folks, it's not just that way in athletics. In your job, if you decided, you know what, I'm going to show up and I'm going to kick back, I'm going to put my feet on my desk and just not even do anything today. How many of you have a boss that would let you do that? Now, I know some of you maybe are the boss, so that may be what you do anyway, right? Yeah. Right? Yeah, we know management. Yeah, okay. The point is, if you were to take that approach in your job, your boss wouldn't be too happy. We have to put 100% effort into everything that we do, not because we're working for God, not because we're trying to impress a coach, not because the preacher said so. We're to put 100% into everything that we do because we're doing it for God. So when it comes to our singing, just do your best. No, your best is not sitting there like this. Your best is participating to the best of your ability, to allowing the Word of God to dwell in you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, and as you sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God. When it comes to your job, do your best. When it comes to whatever it is that you do your best because you're doing it for God. Sometimes in our public worship, we think we can give less than our best. What about, do we excuse ourselves from some aspects of the work of the congregation? What do you mean by that, preacher? Well, do we think that we can disregard something like, I don't know, evangelism? Because after all, evangelism is the preacher's job. Or it's the elder's job, it's the deacon's job, it's the Bible school teacher's job, it's anyone's job but mine. It's not my job to be evangelistic. Actually, it is. Matthew 28:18-20, Jesus says, you want to be my disciple, you're going to go into all the world and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe everything I've commanded you, and surely I am with you always, even to the very end of the age. If you're a Christian, then your job is to evangelize. Period. What about building each other up? That can be a tough one sometimes, don't you think? It can be tough because we remember. We remember back when so-and-so did such and such. Boy, that really upset me. Let's see, it was 15 years ago, but I'm still mad about it. I'm not going to even speak to them. I'm not going to talk to them. I'm not going to... Folks, we have to have a short memory. Somebody offends us, according to Matthew chapter... excuse me. Someone offends us, according to Matthew chapter 18, we go to them and we talk to them and we get through it, work through it so that we can move forward and encourage each other and build each other up. What about benevolence? Benevolence is a tough one because 95% of the people are just trying to scam us. So why would we want to be scammed? Well, because there's that 5% that are genuinely in need. And besides that, everyone has a soul. So maybe we would do good to remember that when someone comes to us and says, I need something, that we help them out a little bit. Matthew 25:31 through 46 tells us when we take care of the people who have needs, then we're really serving Jesus. But what about the various support aspects of the church? Activities that are required to make possible the worship and work of the congregation. What about finding a job that you can do? Finding a ministry that you can be involved in? Clothing ministry. They come up on Wednesday mornings and they have a lot of fun down there, especially when they tell the preacher they have food. It's a lot of fun down there. But anyway, if you have some free time on Friday evening, come up and help out with that. Because you're serving God by serving other people. And there are other areas as well. When you're asked to lead in the worship assembly by saying a prayer or doing the announcements or waiting on the table or what have you, you need to show up when it's your turn to do it. And if you aren't going to be able to show up, at least call Jason ahead of time. He can be quite funny. I'm going to make fun of you, okay, Jason? All right. He can be quite funny. You watch him, he's running around trying to find people to fill in the holes and everything. It can be quite humorous. I always make sure he knows, I'm here, so I'll do the preaching, and you find somebody, and he knows he's in charge of the rest of it. But the point is that when you've agreed to do something, you need to do it. That's part of giving your effort, your best effort. What about do we submit to civil authority? And according to Romans 13:1 through 7, and authority in the family, Ephesians 5 and 6. But disregard the authority God has instituted in the local congregation. Do we see obedience to our elders as optional? When they make a scriptural request of us in the course of implementing our work as a congregation, do we believe that we have the option whether or not we comply with what they have asked us to do? Let me give you a couple for instances. This may shock some of you, but the elders have met and they have determined that we're going to meet on Sunday morning at 9:45 for Bible class. And then we're going to meet at 10:45 Sunday mornings for our worship assembly. And then we're going to have another worship assembly at 6 o'clock on Sunday evening. And on Wednesdays, we're going to meet at 7 o'clock to have a period of Bible study and a devotional. The elders have said this is when the church is going to get together. Do we see it as our prerogative to say, well, I'm going to go through this cafeteria style. I'll be there on Sunday morning for Bible class, and I'll be there on Sunday morning for worship services, but beyond that, I don't have to come? Or do we say, you know what, it doesn't hurt anything for me to be here. In fact, I oftentimes get a lot of good stuff out of being here. Just something to consider. Do we do what our elders ask only when it suits us? When it's convenient for us? When it's something that, we want to do it anyway? Or we go and we ask the elders, can we do so-and-so? Yeah, sure, you can do so-and-so. And then we're excited about it and we're involved. A fourth question, are we selective about the sins which we will avoid? Do we make exceptions for ourselves? Or believe the sins that we commit are more respectable than the sins that others commit? Regarding some sins as less offensive than others is the very point of the context of James 2, 10 and 11. If you don't believe me, go back and read James 2, 1 through 9. That's what he's talking about, is considering one sin worse than another sin. Sin is sin in God's eyes. Obedience to God is not a partial endeavor. The gospel aims to take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ, 2 Corinthians 10:5. God is God of all His will. We cannot disregard any of it without disregarding God Himself. We must live as those who will be judged by the law that gives freedom, James 2:12 tells us. We must truly love the Lord our God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our mind, and with all of our strength if we are to be considered faithful. What about you? Have you been going through your Christian life sort of kind of cafeteria style? Sort of kind of thinking, well, I can handle this, but I really don't want to do that. If so, then I urge you to repent. I urge you to repent because things aren't what they need to be between you and God. And God's not going to change, so we need to change. Maybe that just involves a private response where you're at. Maybe it involves a public response. Maybe you need to publicly respond asking for the prayers of the church because things aren't right between you and God and you want them to be. Maybe you need to publicly respond because you've never put on the Lord in baptism. You've never started down that road. You've never made Jesus your Lord. Well, now is a perfect opportunity to do that. Whatever your need is, don't leave here with that need. And if we can help you in some way to take care of that need, then won't you come to the front now as we stand and sing together.